library tonight. Please join us on Sunday for a live concert with Miles Reed, and come back on Monday for a screening of First Man starring Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong. Tonight we are happy to host a presentation of the Wadsworth Area Historical Society. Please welcome Roger Havens to the library.
I hope I'm welcome all the time I come to this library. I've been doing it long enough. So anyway, good evening and thank you for coming out. We just do a couple of minutes of business because this is our general meeting. If you're interested in membership, Kathy Thompson's here, raise your hand. For $8 for seniors and $10 for general adults, you can have a membership. What does that get you? It gets you updated information every month on what's going on in and around the museum and tells you about programs. I had a guy about 2 months ago who said, well, when is that coal mine presentation? I said, well, you done missed it. And he said, I did? I've been waiting to go. Are you a member? Well, no. Had you been a member, you'd have been updated and reminded. So, again, that's the advantage that you do get to know what's going on here in our local historical society. We are pretty active. We're open every Saturday morning, 9:30 to 11:30, over at the historic house, the old Johnson house, and right next to City Hall. There's no admission charge. Most recently, well, every year we have all the third graders from Wadsworth schools come and visit. We just had 75 children from Overlook visit the other day, and put 75 people in that house. Fortunately, we don't put them in there all together, but even getting one class of 25, it pretty much fills the house. But we give them tours, and you might be interested, if you're a member, to be there to help with the tours, and basically you have a script and you can describe what they're looking at. Most of the kids already know what they're looking at because they have learned about Wadsworth history. And they go in there and they identify the things that they have read about in their book, and they have a great time. And it's better than going to Hill Farm. So I know when we bring the Franklin kids, they will tell me, this is the best field trip I've ever been on. And we simply walk from the school, but we walk through a lot of history coming from the south end and walking through amongst the factories and the railroad and telling them the history of it along the way. Anyway, some things that we do have a $25,000 grant for the house to do improvements. So you may see improvements going on right now. We're painting the interior windows that we had replaced last year. They're all wooden windows to be in kind of up with the historic aspect of the house and not putting aluminum windows in. We'll be repainting the outside of the house. It looks beautiful from a distance, but you get up front, you'll see there's a lot of peeling and chipping. And we're also going to re-pour kind of a patio area in the back from the parking lot in the back to the front. That's where most of us access it when we're there working. And to get that straightened out because it's pretty not good footing back there, and put a little sidewalk to the back patio area too, which right now it's stones that are set down that are badly cracked. So we do have a lot of those things going on, and we're also open on first Friday every month from 5 till 9 in the evening. So there's no excuse for you. And we get people every month coming in and saying, you know what, I've lived in this town all my life and I never came in here. Well, remember, it's a museum now. It's not just a house. So there's things in there that you will identify with, from the injector, the match company. We have a military room that has uniforms from World War I, World War II. Just historical figures in Wadsworth's history. We have one room that's just with school items, so you'll see things from the old centralized, you'll see things from the Mennonite College that once set in that location, plus now all the old schools. We only have one old school left, basically, that's still acting as a school, and that's over at CIS. So a lot of history in there, and I know like Ron Baydu, for instance, he's there every Saturday doing research in sports, and we have things filed away that he digs through the files, and we have most all of the high school annuals. And what did we get one the other day, Fran, from what year? 1914. Anybody graduate that year? Just one person. And so anyway, so that's what a lot of people come in and they research their class. And they have a lot of them here at the library. I think we have a few more than they do. We are missing a few years, and I'm not going to ask Fran to identify those years, but maybe, what, a half a dozen?
No, maybe not that many.
Yeah, so like I say, we're pretty, and a lot of people go up there and there's tables up there to sit and pull those and sit and research on what you're looking for, especially if you're doing a class reunion. Boy, don't you have one coming up here soon?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so anyway, so there's a lot of things to see in that museum. And again, First Fridays, we get a lot of people coming through. It's their first time, and they seem to enjoy it. We have people there that usually Caesar Carino's there. We have him set up for any of your questions. Ask him who's related to who in town, and he will tell you. And even if you're not related, he'll still tell you that you are related to them. But he's usually right, and you end up learning some new things. Another thing we have coming up, they started this a couple of years ago in Medina County. Instead of the fall foliage, which they still have in the fall, they now have a spring tour, and it's just the historical societies. And they rotated around the county. This year it's going to be in Wadsworth, as well as Seville, as well as Chippewa Lake. So they call it the Dandelion Drive, and it's on Sunday, May 19th, so it's in a couple of weeks. It's from noon to 5, and if you come down, the museum will be open. And furthermore, we are going to have miniature train rides. You have to get your tickets at the Historical Society, and then you walk down the street, down to CIS on Wright Drive, and that's where the train will start. And it seats 18 people in the train, so there's 9 seats. Unless you take up 2 seats, and we won't get into that, but we won't charge a double. But anyway, so you're going to jump on that train, and it's going to take you down part of the new trail, because the trail starts there next to Subway, there by CIS. So it's going to go down Wright Drive, it's going to cross South Lyman, it's going to pop over to the trail there, it'll come up behind the old East Street Market, Marion's Closet, it'll continue down and get to Ohio Avenue and then make a loop and come back. So it's only not even maybe a half mile on the trail. The trail is 2 miles long. But because there's a lot of the trail that's not paved, so we can't take the train along there. So this is all paved, and it'll be fun for the kids going up that hill behind Marion's Closet, and just make sure their seatbelt is on. So it costs $2 per person. And again, I have these flyers. I'll set them out here, and you can grab one on your way out if you're interested, so you don't forget. And the train will run about every 20 minutes, I suspect. We've never done this before, so we're just guessing. So you buy your tickets at the Historic Museum. Then if you want to go over to Seville and learn about the Seville Giants, the Captain Bates and his wife who lived there for a time, you'll go into that museum. They actually have a life-size, I don't want to call them dummies, but stuffed people that they stand here and they pretty much go up to the corner of the ceiling of the house, and you can get your picture taken next to them. They don't say much, and they don't charge anything. I'm not sure where the Chippewa Lake is going to have their display, but if you're...
Right in front of the, there's a little white house there at the entrance. You can go in, you know, the parking lot, then there's the entrance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little white house there, and they got some old brides sitting out front.
Okay.
And that's where,
Well, that's good to know.
the lady that is a caretaker is will be doing it.
So whatever your first stop is, whether it's in Seville or Wadsworth or even Chippewa Lake, they will give you a passport that lists what's going on at the different places. Also, whether you know it or not, we have the train museum over, life-size trains over in Seville, just outside of town. I think it's Kennard Road. But that's a stop too, so if you ever wanted to see what a trolley car looked like, just like we're going down the old trolley car track on this train, you'll see not one from Wadsworth, but what they look like, and you can climb aboard and see what those electric trolleys look like. So, and they also offer those trolley rides. I did it one time, I think it's the first Saturday of the month. You can go out there and ride the trolley. It goes down the tracks about maybe 100 yards, and then they put it in reverse and come back. But it does kind of give you the feel, and you know, they have the overhead electric lines that they're hooked to, and so it gives you the feel of what riding one of those is like. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to have those operational on the 19th. I don't know why. I think that's a prime opportunity for them to be able to do those and get a lot of people interested in it. So anyway, that is called the Dandelion Drive. So if you Google it, Dandelion Drive, Medina County, it's kind of run through the Medina Visitor and Convention Center. And so that now will be the site that will pop up with the information. So that's a lot of information. Oh, and last but not least, we have an author out here in the audience who has just published another book. How many is this for you, Mike? Number 2. Okay. Well, you just doubled your number. This is fresh off the press, and the Historical Society donated 100 of these books to us. And for $16.99, you can purchase one of these. You can get it at the Historical Society. I'm going to try to get him over to the bookshelf. And he's donating all his proceeds to the Wadsworth Area Historical Society, at least for those 100. So we thank Mike back there. And he told me exclusively tonight that if you buy one tonight, for an extra $20, he will autograph it. So how he makes his money, I don't know. But anyway, I was fortunate enough to be able to help proofread it and look, and it's as accurate as I could tell, you know, from digging through different things that I had, and what he had, and what the library had, and Dr. Carino has in his brain. So it's interesting because, tell us just a synopsis of what's in it.
Well, it's basically the history of Wadsworth law enforcement, both the from the constables, from the township constables to the village marshals to the municipal police. And I talked to a lot of the retired officers and former officers and coerced them to dig the boxes out from under their beds and go through them and give me old pictures, let me borrow old pictures and newspaper articles and put it all together. I couldn't do that without a lot of help.
Mm-hmm. And he has different activities that went on in Wadsworth over the years. It seemed like there was a lot of activities in the 1920s, who would figure. But, you know, during the Prohibition times and that sort of thing, a lot of things that we're going to hear about through David and how his grandpa had to deal with that time period. So there is a history of that. You can look up your birth date and see what happened that year in Wadsworth. Some of it may be gory, but it is what it is. And anyway, we thank him. And again, I have these out in my car. I can bring in some. Anybody interested in getting one tonight? If I can see a show of hands. Okay, I'll bring in about a dozen. That should cover. And I'll set them over here at the table. And cash or check. You make the checks out to me. No, make them out to WAHS, the Wadsworth Area Historical Society. That's an easy way to do it. Or cash. And our treasurer is here. So, and she has plenty of ones, she informed me. I didn't tell her. Well, he just dropped them off the other day. It's been a last minute thing. So, without further ado, yes, Bob?
There's a question here.
Oh, question?
Oh, I have the tickets for the train ride. Do you get them, I mean, like if you come down with your grandchildren and you come at 1 o'clock, you go to this, that's when you go buy them?
Yeah, park up here in the city parking lot, go next door, get the tickets from us, and then walk down the street.
And you don't buy them ahead, you have to get them then?
Yeah, I haven't figured out doing the buying ahead. it gets too complicated, and I don't know how long it's going to take each train. I don't want to say you're on the noon train.
Okay.
You know, I'm not Mussolini. I
As you
can't
go.
get the trains running on time. But, yeah, it's as you go.
Okay.
And then there will be a little stand over there that they'll check you in, a tent down there. And then you'll get a little brochure that will explain what you're seeing just in that part of the trail. You're going to be able to see where they repaired the trolleys. You probably didn't know that there was a garage there, and you probably never knew that, but the garage is right catty corner from Marion's Closet. But that's where the electric train would have pulled into that. That's why it has such a high overhead door. Oh yeah, it's a believe it or not of Wadsworth. You'll be able to see the old carriage house of E.J. Young, the only thing that's left of his mansion. And it's right behind the Methodist Church. You may not have ever noticed it, but you'll notice it on this ride. So you'll be full of so much history, you'll be at home just Facebooking all over the place, or whatever you do. Okay, so without further ado, any other questions? I'm going to turn the program over. You know what, I always said it was going to be a big group tonight, because if you get all the Lucases and the Blue Baws in the same place, and guess what, a party will break out sometime during this thing. It always does when you get them together. So anyway, David?
Okay.
Thank you.
My name's Dave, and I'm a Lucas. And I need a beer. Other than being a grandson of T.J. Lucas, my only qualification for being in front of you tonight is, on an annual basis, we have a family reunion. And we do skits at the family reunion. And every year, I embarrass myself and my relatives doing skits. So that's the only qualification I have. I'm sure there are many of you here that probably know, because you like history, more about TJ than I do, and I'm hoping to learn from you tonight. So as different aspects of his career come up, I certainly would appreciate it if you would add to the conversation. There are a number of relatives here. My wife, Georgiana's here, my brother, Boyd, my sister, Linda, my niece, Terry, cousins, Gary and Sherry. Dwayne's here, Jerry's here, Boyd's son, Chris, and wife, Joanna's here. Any other relatives I missed? Andy's back there. I just now saw Andy. Leo, the youngest Lucas in the room. Yeah.
Raise your hand if you're not. Okay, now minority.
Is there anybody in the room that knew TJ? Anybody old enough here to know TJ? Okay. I was 11 years old when TJ died. Now, I have very fond memories of TJ, but I never rode along with him on doing arrests. So you're not going to get any first-hand knowledge from me about that. What I'll mostly be doing is sharing stuff that many of you have already read if you've looked at the articles from the News Banner over the years, because he kept many of those articles, and those are what got passed down through the family. The goal tonight is to share those, and I'm going to, unfortunately for you, have to read to you from some of those. But the agenda will be a little bit of a bio on TJ, and then I picked to highlight a few of the stories from his career. And then I have some show and tell, and then we'll wrap it up with some personal memories that I have, and hopefully some of my relatives will share too. So if that's okay with you, now's the time to get out if it isn't, okay? I would ask everybody to take their cell phone out and turn it on. I would like to be interrupted as much as possible. That'll give me time to figure out where the heck we're at in the program. All right. There was an article in 1959, Man of the Week, Tommy Lucas, and I want to read just a little bit because it will more accurately give you some of the information. Tommy Lucas was born on the Silver Creek Doylestown Road on what in 59 was the Thomas Farm. I have no idea who owns that property now, but that was where his sister Mamie ended up living. His father, Samuel Lucas, was a well-known contractor and built an allotment called Lucas Town just west of Silver Creek. Now, Samuel came from Mount Jackson, Virginia, and I had the opportunity many years ago to go there with Mickey Rotman, who was TJ's daughter, and met the last surviving Lucases there before that. As far as I know now, that line of Lucases has ended. But that's where Samuel came from when he moved here. Tommy attended the District 11 school in Silver Creek, but when the enrollment in the one-room school grew to 86, he was transferred up the road to the Weaverville School, where he was graduated from the 8th grade. Sam Lucas operated a 100-acre farm, so Tommy helped with the farm work after school days, and he also helped with carpentry work, which will come into play later in his life, building many of the houses down on Lucas Court that still exist. He eventually struck out on his own. He went to work in the coal mines, which dotted the Silver Creek area. And one of the show and tell things that I'll have over on the side is an old map of where 40 of the mines were in the Doylestown area. I don't know how far that got to Wadsworth, but you'll be able to see that if you're interested. He married a former classmate, Thurza Jordan, in 1902. He was 19 years old at the time, and her father was a mine boss in Silver Creek. In 2005, Tommy went to work at the Ohio Match Company. He worked as an oiler until 1911, and at that time, the Socialist Party had a strong party and persuaded him to run for marshal, town marshal, and against Marshal Henry Bricker. And somewhere in this stuff, there's a picture of Henry Bricker I can show you. And Tommy was 28 at the time. So he served many years, 20 years, in fact, in that capacity. And then at the age of 48, when Wadsworth became a city, he was appointed the first chief of police. While he was marshal, he had to get reelected every 2 years, and he got elected for 10 consecutive terms. He had switched from the Socialist Party to the Republican Party either in the second or third term, so it was pretty early on that he switched to become a Republican. At the age of 62, he retired, and 3 years later, he became the mayor of Wadsworth for a full term. He was reelected, and he served half of that term and resigned, saying that it was for health reasons, which I think it partially was, but I've also come across a letter that there was a lot of petty politics going on at the time, and he was not happy with city council, and so he resigned. And then he lived another 10 years and died in 1961. So, marshal 20 years, chief 14 years, mayor 3 years. While he was marshal, and I don't know about when he was chief, but he was a truant officer for 17 years. He and his wife Thurza went around and took the census of all of the kids in the school system, and so he knew everybody by name and knew whose kids were whose, and that often, I think, played into how he dealt with the kids when they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. He was also the public health officer for 12 years, and we'll hear about how difficult that was during the influenza epidemic, and deputy game warden for 8 years. So 37 years plus of public service, and he worked under 9 mayors. He had over 4,000 arrests, and they spanned the whole host of things that you could think of that police officers have to deal with. He solved Wadsworth's only kidnapping up to that point, which was in 1939, and he dealt with Prohibition for the 13 years that was in existence, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Black Hand Gang, which was an Italian mafia-type gang that were in the South End. So that's the quick overview. Any questions about any of that, or corrections, I should say, to that, if you know about that? I'm going to read the letter of how he finished his career. This is November 1st, 1950, to the honorable members of the Wadsworth City Council. It has been my distinct privilege to serve the people of Wadsworth in the capacity of constable, marshal, chief of police, and mayor for a period of almost 37 years. During all these years, I tried to serve faithfully, putting my whole life into the performance of the duties of my office. My workday was never limited to 8 hours or to 5 or 6 days a week, but extended into all hours of the night and throughout the week. I have now reached an age that makes it advisable to be relieved of the problems of public office, and I hereby tender to you my resignation effective November 15, 1950. The salaries I received were very meager, but the consciousness of having had many opportunities to help hundreds of people to become better adjusted to their family and community life is worth far more to me now and for the future than the possession of millions of dollars. I leave the office of mayor with a deep feeling of appreciation for the many kindnesses and expressions of goodwill from the people of our city. I am very grateful for the cooperation of officials associated with me during all of these years, but I have a sense of disappointment in not having been able to have constructed at the square police quarters to make for a more effective operation of the police department. My aim was always to provide better service, and petty politics cut me to the heart. However, these disappointments are accepted as a part of life, and I hope that the day will soon come when real service to the community will rise above politics. In leaving, I desire to express my thanks to my many friends and wish for Wadsworth a clean and prosperous future. Respectfully, T.J. Lucas. So let's talk about a few of the career highlights, and I'm going to rely on the first book that Mike Berg produced, which is With Pride and Dignity, The History of the Wadsworth Police Department. Now, Mike and I have talked on several occasions, and back when this was being produced, which was in 2002, I think he used some of the information that family members had, but he laid it out in chronological order, and that saves us some time if I use this as my way of getting to some of the highlights. But if you have the interest in the chance, this book is just wonderful in terms of giving a lot of information about the police department here in Wadsworth. I'm going to start, well, let me first say this. There's no way we can cover in any depth, in the short time we have, of all of the types of things that T.J. Lucas had to deal with and the town of Wadsworth had to deal with during his career. But it ranged from breaking up fights to murder, from shootings to break-ins, abandoned babies, stolen cars, bad language on the squares by adolescents, vandalism, pickpockets, speeders, rapes, DUIs, car crashes, accidents involving other vehicles that weren't cars. I mean buggies, hobos. One day he arrested 33 hobos on the same day. Robbers, and something else I can't read. Oh, truants. Getting kids back into the classroom. But although he was, for those 20 years, the town marshal, he deputized other individuals when he needed more manpower. And I want to recognize some names here. Al Mohn, M-O-H-N, Ben Witchey, P.M. Weisenheimer, or Weisheimer. I've seen it spelled both ways, Weisenheimer and Weisheimer. I'm not sure. Anybody know the correct for sure? Okay. Harry Sears, Ed Transu, Wilson King, Harv Weldy, Harold Waltz. So we'll start with this, one of what I think is the most interesting cases he worked on, and this was early in his career, 1915. So he had started in 1911. So he's 4 years into this job. And it was a homicide in 1915 topped the news. On January 19th, an Italian, John Lanzo, age 30, was walking to his job as an interpreter at the Ohio Match Company. Another man walking with him on their 4 a.m. walk down Water Street shot him 3 times. Mr. Lanzo was struck in the head, stomach, and back. John was the brother of Charles Lanzo, who had all been so shot and killed just 18 months prior to that in Wadsworth. The Black Hand was suspected in the shooting. The assassin was believed to have fled towards Barberton. A few months later, in March, Mrs. Lucas, this is Thurza, found a crudely handwritten note on their back porch one morning. The note was held in place by a pair of their daughter's boots. The note said, "Tom, you are to be killed if you don't mind yourself." In the months following the murder, Marcia Lucas had kept numerous Italian suspects under surveillance, and in doing so had raised the ire of some in the local Italian community. Now, my Aunt Mickey tells the story that she certainly remembers that time because the kids were instructed they weren't allowed to go outside at night to the outhouse. So they had to use the chamber pots inside, and that they found cigarette butts on a corner where somebody was obviously keeping an eye on the house. Now, Tommy kept he had his police revolver, of course, but he also had a smaller caliber, I believe it was a .32 handgun, which I have, under his pillow, or at least by his bed. Now, that was going to be a piece of the memorabilia I was going to bring tonight, but then it hit me about taking an unloaded gun into the public library. And the last thing I want to do is get that confiscated. So you won't see that tonight, but just picture a smaller handgun, okay? But they were serious people at the time. There were 2 theories as to why Mr. Lanzo was shot. The first, and apparently the most widely accepted, was that Mr. Lanzo was working part-time as an Italian interpreter for Marshal Lucas and local law enforcement. The second theory is that Mr. Lanzo had been involved in a dispute over a local woman. At the time that the note left for Marshal Lucas was reported in the paper printed a warning to the sender by saying, "Marshal Lucas is pretty well able to look out for himself, and the man who attacks him will find a warm reception in store." I don't know whether he appreciated taunting the Italians or not, but they never, Lanzo would never implicate any of them. And so I can't tell you exactly what the disposition of that story was, but I do remember them talking about the Black Hand Gang in Wadsworth. And I'm sure if Caesar was here, he could fill us in a little bit more about that. On to 1918, the influenza epidemic. And I don't have any statistics about how many people died. Worldwide, it was millions, but I don't know about Wadsworth specifically. But I do know, because Tommy was the health officer for the town, flu ban, effective at midnight Wednesday. The flu ban is again in effect, and all public gatherings are prohibited for an indefinite time. The lid was clamped on at midnight Wednesday night. The schools, churches, clubs, movie houses, and pool rooms are affected by the order issued by Health Officer Lucas Wednesday afternoon. The large number of new cases which have developed during the past week have caused consternation generally. Health Officer Lucas discussed the matter with local physicians Wednesday morning, and all agreed that for the protection of the community, it was absolutely necessary to prohibit public gatherings of all kinds. There were about 30 cases in Wadsworth at the present time. Both the visiting nurse, Mrs. Leora Young, and her assistant, Mrs. Marie Lorton, have been stricken with the disease but are recovering. And then later it says, since Health Officer Lucas and his assistant, Dr. George Wuchter, were stricken, no record of cases has been kept. Both of these officers are improving, and Mr. Lucas is now able to get out of bed. And somewhere I read that during that time, he was calling on people that he knew that were sick and was helping keeping their coal furnaces stoked so that they kept warm during that time. Oh, here's a 1919. This is kind of a funny story. Not about TJ, though. It's a story now passing the rounds about Pat Hutchinson, sheriff of Summit County, but formerly of Medina, is to the effect that Pat recently filled the radiator of his automobile with raisin mash, which he had confiscated on one of the raids, with the expectation that the large amount of alcohol which it contained would prevent it from freezing. Says the mixture worked fine. A few Sundays ago, however, Pat decided to take the family to church. After arriving there, he noticed a thin vapor shooting out of the overflow pipe of his radiator. People in the vicinity also displayed an unusual interest in Pat's car. The sheriff easily ascertained the reason for the smell emanating from his machine would have put an ordinary brewery to shame. Hastily dumping his family, Pat beat it home in order to escape an ever-increasing crowd of curious citizens. 1921 was the recovery of over $1,000 worth of stolen freight by Marshal Lucas. Now, you think about $1,000 in 1921, that's some pretty big money in today's terms. It seems that some things in law enforcement never change. Oftentimes, a minor infraction can lead to officers to more serious crimes. Such as the case in 21, Marshal Lucas stopped a truck being operated by Will Lane, age 35, and his passenger, Joseph Bell, age 25. Lane was attempting to drive his one-ton Ford truck eastbound on the north side of Broad Street. Marshal Lucas stopped the truck for traffic violation. When he asked Lane what they were hauling, Lane replied, "None of your damn business." The newspaper reported that telling this to Tommy was the one sure way to get your load examined. The truck contained 13,100 cigars, 35 pairs of shoes, along with a large amount of notions whatever notions, and groceries. They were taken to jail and held for the mayor. Prohibition ran from 1920 to 1933, and there are a lot of stories about stills and bootleggers, and I remember Grandpa telling me he could always tell when a car was running hooch because it sat so low on its springs. And then he would stop them and check them out, find hooch any place that they could possibly try to hide it. But Mickey, Aunt Mickey, his daughter, told me a story about Mrs. Treveg. They evidently owned a beer garden and sandwich place down at the South End, she said by the barber shop. And Mrs. Treveg and Thurza were real good friends. And Grandpa got really frustrated over a period of time because he knew they were selling alcohol there, but he could never catch her. And it was because Thurza would find out that they were going to do a raid, and she would send one of the kids down to tell Mrs. Treveg. Another interesting note about this, in many of the newspaper accounts of Marshall Lucas confiscating moonshine or illegal booze, it reports that he turned the moonshine over to the Wadsworth Hospital. This seemed to be a regular practice. In an attempt to find out why the marshal would take all the confiscated moonshine to the hospital, Mike learned that it was because they had the only facility in the area to test the substance for the amount of alcohol content. I think another story that kind of gives you a little bit insight about how he felt about people and how Thurza felt about him. This one occurred in 1923. Early one afternoon, Erie train 16 pulled into Wadsworth. A woman about age 40, a 5-year-old girl, and an infant girl got off the train. The woman left the 5-year-old in Batterson and Rockwood's shoe store while she went to get a room at the Hotel Kreider. The room was obtained around 5:15, and the woman left the baby about 5 months of age in the room while she went out for lunch. She never returned. When the woman hadn't returned after an hour, Marshal Lucas was called. The baby was placed in the loving care of Marshall's wife, Thurza. While working the case, the marshal learned that the woman had come to Wadsworth from Rittman, where she had been for about a week. He also learned that the woman had recently shipped a package to Ray, Ohio. Marshal Lucas believed that the poor woman was just up against it and had been deserted by the child's father and left penniless. She took this way to find a better home for the baby than she could provide. I don't know how long they kept the baby, but I guess there was numerous times they took kids into the home to take care of them until arrangements could be made. In 1925, on the night of February 13th, Marshal Lucas, along with 3 deputies, located a still on the Orton farm just north of Keller's Corners. A search warrant was obtained. They brought back the still, 1,400 pounds of corn sugar, cracked corn, a pressure tank, and a pump. They destroyed about 26 barrels of mash and brought back about 40 gallons of liquor, which was taken to the hospital. Except 2 gallons. No, that doesn't say that. Each man involved in the operation was fined $200 in costs on the charges of possession of liquor and possessing articles to manufacture. So the Roaring Twenties were partly roaring because of alcohol. 1929. I don't know how well we can confirm this story. I know family members believe it, and even one of the community articles in the newspaper talked about this, and I'm not sure who they talked to, but there was a time when Tommy supposedly stopped a speeder as he came through Wadsworth. As Tommy approached the car, he recognized the driver as the famous jazz musician and band leader Jimmy Durante. Being a music lover, the marshal gave Mr. Durante his choice: pay the fine for speeding or go to his house with him and play the piano for him. On that day, the man who would later become a big-time television and movie celebrity played the piano on Lucas Court for Marshal Lucas and his family. (1932) was when Wadsworth became a city, and Tommy was appointed the first chief of police. But the Wadsworth City Council debated whether Chief Lucas and his officers should wear uniforms. Tommy was against the idea, saying, "Does council want me to wear a nicely pressed uniform to pick up dead cats and dogs?" Tommy went on to say that there were times when he should have a uniform, but there are times when he's doing investigative work that he shouldn't be in uniform. To that, City Councilman Charles Lozier stated, "There isn't a man or boy in Wadsworth who doesn't recognize Tom Lucas from 2 blocks away. A uniform won't give you away." When he first started as marshal, he did his duties by riding on a bicycle to get around the town. And then he came to the conclusion that it didn't do him a lot of good to get to the scene of whatever the problem was out of breath. So he purchased his first motorcycle with his own money so that he could perform his job better. And he eventually wore out a total of, I think it's 6 motorcycles, Harley Davidsons. Well, in 1932, he wrote Harley Davidson, and they put his letter in their magazine. And in his letter, he states, "Wadsworth officially became a city on January 1st, 1932, and with this new form of government, my appointment as chief of police followed my 20 years as marshal. I feel at this time I owe the Harley-Davidson Motor Company a letter of praise for the important aid their motorcycle has played in the curbing of crime. I first took office as marshal on January 1st, 1912. The following summer, I purchased a motorcycle out of my own funds in the belief that it would be ideal for police work. Every time thereafter, I was elected. The trust and confidence of the people was gained to a great extent by the use of my motorcycle, which enabled me to get quickly to the scene of the possible trouble and in most cases prevent the trouble because of my quick arrival. Likewise, the only way to handle traffic efficiently is by the use of motorcycles. The village officials saw the value of motorcycle police work and have purchased a total of 5 Harley-Davidsons over the years. My most effective piece of equipment is my Harley-Davidson. Without it, I would be handicapped to an immeasurable extent. The total mileage covered in my years as marshal and chief is over 200,000 miles, and about 3,000 arrests have been made by me during that time. I'm very well satisfied with the performance of Harley-Davidson motorcycles in every respect and can recommend their use to any department of police. Signed, respectfully yours, Chief of Police T.J. Lucas. So, I have numerous pictures of his motorcycles, and maybe I'll just pass these around, but they'll be over on the side too, if you want to take a gander at those. In terms of national headlines, in 1945, the Alvin Karpus case came Alvin Karpus came to Wadsworth, I should say, and he was named public enemy number 1 by J. Edgar Hoover after the G-Man killed John Dillinger outside of the theater in Chicago. Karpus was a bank robber, kidnapper, car thief, and pretty much a jack of all trades within the criminal world. In January 1935, Karpus and associate Harry Campbell came to Wadsworth. In his book, Public Enemy Number 1, The Alvin Karpus Story, Karpus tells the story like this. He gave us a road map and we plotted a route across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania and across to the friendly cities of Ohio. We had to switch cars. In every state, the cops would be watching for our 34 Pontiac, and as we drove through Pennsylvania, we kept our eyes out for another car to steal. On the highway near Allentown, we came across a 34 Plymouth with doctor's emblems on the rear bumper. It might have been custom made for us. Nobody stopped a doctor's car. We could drive anywhere at any time of the night without making a cop suspicious. The driver was alone in the car and we drove alongside him. "State police," Harry shouted out the window. "Pull over, we wanted to talk to you." Harry climbed in the doctor's door and followed me until we came to a side road. I parked the Pontiac and left the engine running. The gas would burn down, and when the cops found the car, they'd think that we'd run out of gas and were still on foot somewhere in the area. Then Harry and I pulled away with the doctor. He was Dr. Horace Hunsinger, a guy in his middle 20s, and he was heading for the state hospital in Allentown after visiting his parents in Philadelphia. He told us that if he didn't turn up for a few hours, no one would miss him. He was the ideal victim for us, and we treated him with absolute politeness. He, in turn, didn't seem especially nervous, and the bunch of us got along like old buddies. We wheeled across Pennsylvania. Near Altoona, I could see police cars at the side of the road. I expected a trap, but when the cops noticed the doctor's emblem, they waved us through. We drove all night and all the next day, and by nightfall we had crossed into Ohio. It was time to drop the doctor off. People at the hospital might be wondering about him. We wanted to get rid of young Hunsinger, but he didn't seem anxious to lose us. He knew that we were criminals, and that was all. Maybe we fascinated him. His radio had been broken when we took over the car, and we hadn't heard any news all day, but Harry fiddled with the thing and made it work. Lowell Thomas came on. The entire eastern seaboard he announced was barricaded against two desperate gunmen who had shot their way out of Atlantic City. Thomas gave our names, description, and backgrounds, and all of a sudden our friendly doctor was anxious to leave us. We pulled into a town called Wadsworth and pushed Dr. Hunsinger into the town hall, which was empty. He was terrified, sure that we were going to shoot him. We dragged him into the basement and tied him up next to the furnace where he'd be warm until someone found him. We put a gag around his mouth, and I stuffed a $50 bill into his breast pocket to pay his way home. Then Harry and I took off for Toledo in the doctor's car. Carpus was mistaken, though. In the photograph in his book, it plainly shows Chief Lucas walking into the Guilford Grange Hall on Greenwich Road, not the Wadsworth Town Hall where Carpus thought he was. He nevertheless had to come through Wadsworth in order to get there. The news made national headlines, and Chief Lucas was featured in newspapers such as the Dallas Morning News and Los Angeles Examiner. In the LA paper, Tommy's quoted as saying, "Dr. Hunsinger told me that both men were well clothed and both were armed with submachine guns, which it kept pointed at his back while he drove. They did not stop for food." Hunsinger also stated that Carpus had tied him to a post in the basement of the Grange Hall. He had been able to loosen the knots, free himself, and walk to a nearby farmhouse where Chief Lucas was called. Carpus was finally captured in '36 and later that year was sentenced to life in prison. He was 28 years old. He arrived at Alcatraz and served the longest term of any criminal on the Rock, 26 years. He was released in '62 and died in Spain in '79. Just a couple more. Are you holding up okay? Here's the kidnapping case. And this is my grandfather's account of this. The Wells kidnapping case, date September 4th, 1939. The home of Willis Wells, 139 Highland Avenue, Wadsworth, Ohio, was entered on September 4th, 1939 at about 2:45 o'clock a.m. by tearing the screen from a cellar window on the east side of the house. The intruder went to the second story of the house and carried Dorothy May, the 5-year-old daughter, from her bed down a flight of stairs and out of a side door to the driveway. The maid, Margie Rohr, and her companion, John Roth, were returning home at this time and parked their car in front of the house. The lights of the car frightened the kidnapper, who laid the child down on the ground near the driveway and disappeared in the darkness to the rear of the house. The child ran back into the house screaming and crying, arousing the parents, telling them what had happened, and that the man who had carried her out of the house held his hand over her mouth so she could not make a noise. The father called out to the maid, asking her if she had been in the house, and she said no. At the time, the police were called, and officers H.H. Weldy and E.L. Hamilton were there in a few minutes and investigated and found the screen torn from the cellar windows on the east side of the house and called me, Lucas, at about 3:10 a.m. Mr. Van Allen of the State Highway Patrol at Massillon, Ohio, was called to try for fingerprints the same day but wasn't able to find any. On September 6th, I sent the cellar screen and a pillowcase which had a spot of blood on it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for analysis. And I'll have a couple of those letters signed by J. Edgar Hoover that they had received it, they did the analysis, but it wasn't really any help. There wasn't enough blood that they could test. The same day, Officer Transu and myself talked to William Fry, 19 years old, living at 41 Crestwood. This boy had been confined in the feeble-minded institution at Apple Creek for about 3 years, but had been home for 3 months on a trial visit, and due to previous experience with him, he was under suspicion. We failed to accomplish anything on September 6th. Had another interview with him, but could get no information. On September 7th, Mr. Fry asked my permission to take the boy back to the Apple Creek Institution, which was granted. On Sunday, September 10th, Safety Director J. M. Neath, Prosecuting Attorney R.E. Snedden, and myself went to Apple Creek and obtained a partial confession from William Fry on the kidnapping, then returning home. The same day, we made another trip to the institution and got a complete confession from Fry. On Tuesday, September 12th, Snedden and his stenographer, also myself, went to Apple Creek and got a signed confession from Fry and delivered him to the county jail at Medina for safekeeping. A certified copy of the warrant on a charge of kidnapping was mailed to Dr. Follow at Apple Creek for their files to show Fry was released from the institution. And then on September 25th, Sheriff Roy Krugel and myself took Fry to the Lima State Hospital by way of Apple Creek to get the necessary papers. So that was the kidnapping case. Now, a sad corollary to that, Dorothy May was 5 years old at that time, and then Grandpa had typed this letter from a newspaper article, but Dorothy May Wells, 21, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Willis Wells, leaped to her death from the 8th floor of a downtown Chicago office building last night. And then it gives the details on that. Well, she was 5 in 39, and then she was 21 when she passed. So whatever that math is. I need to speed up, don't I? Okay, I'll skip a couple things. There's another picture that I'll put over here. This meant a lot to TJ, and it means a lot to me, but it's I had this picture taken with this old colored lady, Mrs. Luther Lee, who is near 90 years old and who I have known for at least 32 years. Mrs. Lee remembers slavery and has been a law-abiding and highly respected person. My one reason for this picture is that back in about 1915, when I was a candidate for marshal of the City of Wadsworth and Mrs. Lee went to the polls to vote, she was asked which ticket she wanted, Republican or Democrat. She replied, "I don't care which ticket I get, just so I get the ticket with Tommy Lucas's name on it." Many of you, I assume, already know what Tommy looked like, but I will, just pass some of these down. These are different pictures that we have of him. here's one of him on one of his motorcycles, and we have a couple additional pictures that were taken at this same thing, same time, and the one taken farther away shows a sign that said 1933 on this, and he's talking with his daughter and two other young women, and I've always thought that they were the Osborne sisters. One of them was an Osborne, but I was corrected about the other one, but now I can't tell you who that person was. McFarland? Okay. There's other stuff I was going to show you, but we'll save that for just over on the table. You want to go over. And then lastly, I want to talk about some memories. And since I can't remember them, I got to look at my paper. Like I said, I was 11 years old when Grandpa died, and that was my first real funeral, and I just remember crying my eyes out over at the cemetery. I grew up on Lucas Court, just 2 houses from where he was living at that time, and I was down there all the time as a kid. And Grandpa and his one son, Jimmy, my uncle, when Grandpa retired, he had one of the old police cars, and of course police was blacked out on it, but they used that to pull a trailer around town, and they would haul junk for people to get rid of it and take it down to the city dump. And I got to ride along sometimes and scrounge around in the dump for stuff. I remember a canteen I found one time. But they also would pick up day-old donuts at the pastry shop that used to be down right out on this road. And I would be down there every day trying to get those day-old donuts that they got. That's one of the memories. You know, he taught me a lot of respect for the law, and particularly about guns. And one of the stories that I remember he told me directly is, if you go down South Lyman and you turn left to go on Lucas Court, to the right is a cement wall, a retainer wall for that house on 215 that faces Lyman Street. And he said he had confiscated a number of guns over time, and they are buried in that wall, because that was his way of just getting rid of them so that nobody else could ever use them again. Growing up on Lucas Court was like my own ethnic neighborhood. My Uncle Joe lived across the street. That house was built by TJ and his sons. Directly across the street was a smaller house that one time had been a tin shop for his daughter Lucille's husband, Red, but then turned into a house. And I know a number of different families had lived in that. But next to that house was the big house that was built for Lucille. Then on the corner of that property was the house that Grandpa and Jimmy stayed in until his death. 215 was the original homestead. Across the street was a house that he had bought, and I remember them moving them, bought it from uptown here somewhere, and moved that down Lyman Street. And I'm a little kid sitting on the lawn at 215 seeing these trucks pull that house down Lyman Street until they put it over there. He built a house then up from that, which would be on the north side of Lucas Court. That's back in a little bit. That's the last house he built, and I remember him working on that. And I remember him cutting his thumb on the table saw, which I have since I've done that, and so I know I'm related to him. He built the house that I grew up in, and Boyd and Linda grew up in, 140 Lucas Court. When my parents died, then I bought it from my siblings, and then when George and I moved to Indiana for a job opportunity, Boyd bought it, and Boyd and Jerry are still living there. And then next to that house was a house that was built for his daughter Mickey, house, and Leonard and Mickey Rotman lived in it until they moved to Arizona. Then Billy Gorman lived in it for a long time, and he was a cousin, you know, if you trace things back far enough. And I won't get into that. I don't remember the exact detail of that. But anyhow, you couldn't get away with anything, or I couldn't. I had all these relatives on the street. Anytime I came uptown, well, what's your name? Well, I'm Dave Lucas. Who's your dad? Oh, Bobby. Oh, yeah, well, we know Bobby, and of course we know TJ. So there was not getting away with anything in this town. They had euchre parties. Grandpa was a huge euchre player and very enthusiastic. And when he laid a hand down and won that hand, he thumped the table. And I remember him doing that many a nights. And there was an article in the newspaper about playing at the fire department and him doing that. I said, we have reunions. Well, one of the reasons why we've had reunions now for 45 years, I remember growing up and having reunions in the backyard on 140 with Grandpa, and it was every year when Mickey and Leonard came back from Arizona, and then they would get everybody together and they would sing. And I remember one night they sang Too Much, Too Long. Some guy had a steel guitar playing, and the police department came down and shut us down. He had lost his pole at that time, I guess. But once I got married, then George and I started a reunion back up. And then we had it for 9 years. Boyd bought the house, and he ran the annual reunion for 34 years, and now his son Chris has taken it over. And so we get to see our siblings and all of the blue balls. And occasionally the Rudes. There are millstones, these huge millstones that were brought on Lucas Court. I can't tell you the year, but they started first behind 215 to walk up to the next house, which is the one that I said was built for Lucille, and they sat at the back of at the top of those steps. But the boys then moved that behind Joe Lucas's house at the top of the street, and there's a little driveway that goes behind those houses. I don't even think it has a name. There's Lucas Court and there's Park Street, but a drive that goes behind all those houses, and you can see those millstones. So if you're ever down that way, just go back in there. You can weave your way around. TJ loved the Friday night fights, and he'd come to our house and they'd eat peanuts and drink beer, and he'd be sitting in that chair and he'd be as animated as those boxers were. And I can remember that. But, you know, being 10 years old, I can also remember he was heavy at that time. He wasn't that tall of a man, but he had good weight to him, stocky guy. But I could hear the water swishing in his belly when he would walk around. I'm sorry, TJ. I just had to tell that story. That's enough for mine. Now's the time for others to share their stories.
I just have one.
This is my sister, Linda.
One particular memory was with the court, he was just all family. But to make sure that he got to see everybody, he always came around supper time. And that's when you did. You sat at a table, you know, and ate with your kids. Now it's all busy and everything. But he would go from house to house, just walk in, how you doing, what happened today, the whole thing. Then he'd go to the next house, go over to Joe's, talk to them, and it was just a fond memory of him. I think I was kind of wrapped up in my own life then, you know, and high school and all that was my main thing. So Grandpa was kind of, you know, But that was a favorite memory, getting to check and see how we were all doing.
Thanks, Linda. Anyone?
I was born and raised in Silver Creek. And Tommy Lucas was a legend. And Lucas Town was at the end of Silver Creek. And, my dad talked about him all the time.
One of the articles talks about he always believed in a fair policy of dealing with people. And he would give them a warning to begin with. But then his next sentence was, next time they get the full extent of the law. And I think he was proud of helping so many people, particularly kids, get back on the right track without them having a record to deal with as long as they cleaned up their act.
I don't ever remember him writing much. He had an old Smith Corona typewriter that you had to punch. He typed everything.
Yep. And a two-finger typer.
Yeah, he'd pull it up to his chair and just type everything.
Gloria Schilling has a comment.
Yes.
We lived in the house that's that way back. I think it was one.
Oh, okay.
And my son and Boyd were play buddies. When it becomes at mid-afternoon, it's snack time, they'd go over to Tommy's house, and he'd give them Ritz crackers sandwiches with peanut butter in between. That was their snack for the day. You remember that?
I was 5 years old.
Yeah, that's pretty young.
Well, I remember you living there, and of course, being a kid, you never wanted to walk around. You always wanted to cut through people's property, and I was always cutting down by your house, always looking to see whether you were out or not, and then would run. A shortcut down behind Gibbs Radiator, because it was just shorter than going down to the other street and walking.
Fine with it though.
Here's a picture of those millstones I was talking about. This is, I'm actually in the picture with Grandpa when I was, 5 or 6 years old. So I'll start moving stuff over there. Anybody that cares to see any of this. Oh, yeah, I forgot to show you these things. Dwayne Blueball brought this down. There is that shows that T.J. Lucas and Sons had a coal business that they ran. And there was also a story somewhere in there about how sometimes they gave free coal to those people during the Depression that couldn't afford it. So if I could have some help moving those over. Then Dwayne also brought this picture of TJ, and this has to be one of his early motorcycles on there. This is when he ran for mayor. As I told you, he started out on the socialist ticket, switched to Republican, and ended on a Democratic ticket. So he covered all the bases. And there's a number of names that Joe Bender for President of Council, Bates, E.C. Bates for 1st Ward, Dewey McCain for 2nd Ward, Kenneth Fenton, 3rd Ward, Harold Sickles for 4th Ward, Lyman Hartman, Councilman at Large, Blaine Mansfield, Councilman at Large, B.E. Coleman, Councilman at Large, Frank Emming, City Auditor, J.R. Crossan for City Solicitor, and R.D. Sondels for Treasurer. And I recognize a number of those names.
By the way, while he's showing those, and he closes us down at 9, if you want to purchase one of these books, if you're still in here, you can listen. Come over to this table.
Then this plaque was made by my dad, Robert Lucas, with some of Tommy's stuff on here. And I'll mention this is where that handgun sat. But this is the chief badge off of his cap, and then this is the chief of police badge on his shirt. His handcuffs, this is a handcuff that's called a come-along. And I don't know how often he used it, but you would wrap it around a wrist, and when you turned it, you could pull somebody anywhere you wanted them to go. Then his billy club, his regular nightstick, and then I pulled this one off because this one he bought, and it also fires tear gas. And so you can take the end off and put a tear gas shell in it and shoot it. Now, as I understand it, he never shot anybody in 34 years and was never shot at himself. And to me, that's pretty amazing. So we'll put the rest of the pictures over there, and then just a couple quick things. One, I want to thank you all for coming. It's certainly my pleasure to thank you, to talk about TJ, and I wish I would hear more stories, but we told you mostly what we know, although we couldn't cover everything. And then one last thing is, I'd like Ron Bayduk to come up for a second. I want you to hear from him the work that he's doing right now about researching.
Well, enough about me. Congratulations to the Lucas family on this commemoration. This is great. At least a part of our history here that is not what I call lost stone or stray. A lot of the history that is a part of this town has been pushed away. And for instance, this part of town, this ain't downtown. This is uptown. Those of you that are from here, like I am, this is uptown. Where we grew up is downtown. Amen, brother. Okay? Sure. Okay? So that's our geography lesson for the night. Stand up, please, everybody. I'm a former football coach. Please stand up. I gotta wake you guys up. Come on. We're gonna have a little fun here because I got Dave. You don't even know he's doing this time, let alone his family. Okay? Now I have a real story about this Lucas clan. And you guys aren't going to believe this. This family is a little different. Okay? No wonder they were on an alley street down on Lime Street. Okay? Would the immediate Lucas family please come forward? The immediate one. You know who you are. Come on up. Okay? I want the rest of you to kind of leave your seat and come over here on the sides, because we're going to steal a couple chairs here. And I'm going to tell you a little story about the Lucas family. And I bet you're oops, sorry. Okay? I bet you are. Okay? All right? One day, it was in the spring between 1960 and 62. How old were you?
Oh, Lordy.
Huh? That was your heyday, huh?
Yeah.
You went to TAC and all that good crap, right? Huh? Okay? And there are a lot of families over time that receive the accolade that they are full of it. Okay? Well, ladies and gentlemen, did you know that the Lucas family was full of hocus pocus? Okay? Full of hocus pocus. Got you, buddy. You gotta know Dave and I, we go way back. I grew up on Park Street, and we were always down on the court. It probably is about 1960, 62. Think of it on Lucas Court, springtime, kind of hot. And Dave, for some reason, had a bunch of us come over one day, and we ended up having a seat, Dave. Okay? Boy, do you make believe. I'm gonna make believe that you're Mike Bowles. You my son. Okay? And I'm gonna sit here. Okay? But this time, I'm not gonna be part of the action. I'm gonna be probably one of my best friends at the time. Pruitt. Right?
I know what he's up to.
Okay, so what we got going on here, we got 3 chairs, and we have this card table. You remember this? No? You don't? The card table is really weird. Dave, can you describe the card table? What it looked like? What
It was a regular sized card table, but it had wooden legs, and it's very important that it has wooden legs. This will not
A metal leg table, wooden legs.
Okay, so you have those specifics. And so we had more than just what we have here today. We had, like I said, Gold, we had Groover, we had a bunch of guys from Franklin School. And in the springtime, we're getting bored going down, and Mr. Holcomb's kicking our butts with the paddle all the time. Mr. Griner's kicking our, you know what? And so we come up to Lucas's place, and Dave's got this thing going on with this table. Come on up here if you want. Everybody, come on up. Come on up closer. You gotta laugh, gotta have a little fun. Get over here. I'm not trying to wake you up. Okay? I'm a senior buck too, come on. Okay? Well, what's funny is Dave explained the game, if you would. And that's all we're gonna do.
Okay.
This will scare the living heck out of you.
My mom showed me this. You get 3 people around this this card table with wooden legs, and you all put your hands on the top of it. And you start chanting, table up, table up, table up, table up, table up, table up, and one side would come up.
What the hell's going on here?
And you could ask it questions, and it would tap once for yes and twice for no, and say, does Karen Aston like me? Boom. Boom.
I ain't kidding you. You know the Ouija board business? This is kind of like it. This is scared the hell out of you.
And you couldn't, you look like I'm the leverage point, but you could not push hard enough to make that happen without anybody, getting away with it. And the hands were just slightly on the table, and that thing, and it would answer questions. And Ronnie Pruitt,
Ron Pruitt, the black guy, okay?
his eyes got so big around,
You had that table like
Yeah.
this.
he never came to the house again.
So hocus pocus, Luke.
Oh,
I'll
that was funny.
pick up my Uber.
Then divulge the secret.
Make sure you get
That's secret.
There's no secret. It worked.
That had to be a cardboard top too, though, right? The table was.
Yeah, that's the only one we ever did it on. Yeah, you're probably right.
Where'd you learn that?
Just, my mom showed me that.
Your mom?
Yeah.
Totally? Oh, man. Scared the heck out of us.
Thanks for your help.
Good to see you, bud.
Oh, you got me. I wanted to get you up to talk about the football boy.
We're working on it.
That's great.
Thanks for your help.
Oh, thank you.